Uh, Welcome, everybody. My name is Dorothy Byrne, and I'm the new president of Murray Edwards. And it's fantastic to be here, and that this is basically the first event that I am joining in on. So I feel very fortunate. I'm really, really lucky because I took over from Barbara, who has left this college in a really vibrant and exciting state, and I'm incredibly grateful to you, Barbara. And this is your event, so over to you.
I think she's very nice to even let me through the door, actually. So. No, I want to give a big welcome to all of you. We're absolutely delighted about this conference. It's been a very long time in coming, the planning and then, the delays with COVID. And I just want to say thank you to you all for sort of sticking with us through it and actually finally turning up, which is absolutely great. Of course, we would have liked to have the whole lecture theatre full. But again, for social distancing reasons, we thought, we better stick to this. But what you should know is there are another about 120 people online now, because this is being live streamed out, and a lot of people who are connected to us as alumni or people through the art collection will be all on listening to tonight. They won't be with us tomorrow, really. We've tried, in terms of the people who are here, to make sure we have the best mix we possibly could. I hope this will be a conference where, for once, we have quite a lot of young people. Because I was saying to somebody else that, actually us oldies have said the same thing to each other for probably 30 years. We don't want any more of that. No, we want young people really involved in telling us what they think, what they want in all of this. Really important. And of course, we try to get as much as we could from all of the diversities of women that there are, with partial success, I think. But I think we do have a number of people from black and ethnic minority backgrounds, and that's incredibly important because we know that they all suffer from double discrimination, and we just got to keep remembering that as we go through, because it is so much work for them just to get to be seen at all. So I hope that what we're going to do today is something more than just sort of have a conference where people just sort of talk about things and nothing happens. The idea with this conference is, of course, that we think about the reasons that women's creativity has not been recognised or rewarded, their leadership has not been encouraged in the arts, right across the arts. And again, that diversity, we've got dancers here and musicians and writers and a slight overwhelming number of visual arts people, but that happens to be because we have an art collection, I think. But a real mix of people from different backgrounds. So comparing some of these different backgrounds and how they work will be very interesting in its own right. But we know we're bound to talk about both the past and the present and why women are not recognised. For me, I've been sort of quite interested in this question because of our own art collection. And once, a few years ago, I was asked to give a talk actually in the National Gallery. I mean, I'm not an artist and I'm no expert in this, but I was asked to give a talk or be on a panel about what it was like living and working in an art collection. So I thought, well, I don't know a lot about this. So who do you ask? You ask the students. Absolutely fantastic responses that they gave me. And I'll just give you one. This student said to me, I said, well, what's it mean to you having this art collection around you? And she said, it's like having emotion on every wall. And I thought that was really absolutely fascinating. Another one said to me, well, I keep looking at that picture of Eileen Cooper, and when I was with my boyfriend, I saw all sorts of things in it, and I split up with him, and now I see all sorts of other things in it. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic. I mean, that sort of, that creativity that's there, and of course, men and women aren't entirely different, but what do we bring that's different? What's additional and extra? So that's a bit of the exploration side, but being a college that wants to move things on in the women's area, I hope we're going to go a lot further than that. I hope what will come out of this is a call to action, a sort of a mini agenda, if you like, about the things that this group of people think should be done, where we can move to really make a change in this. You know, all this has been going on so long, and yes, there are improvements, but what can we do? What are the things we could do to really make a difference, you know, as our young women are coming up now, as those who are in the mid-range are still not getting into leadership positions, etc. What is it that can be done? So it's not, we'll make you work tomorrow afternoon after lunch. It's a good time because you need to apply your brains then, you know, get going again, and see what we can get. See, and just all ideas are welcome to really try and think this through. So I think it's going to be really exciting. There's been a lot of buzz outside. People, I'm sure, I think it's because it's such a wonderful conference, but it's actually probably because it's the first time people have got together since COVID, actually. So people are so pleased just to be here. And we do start with an absolutely fantastic, outstanding speaker, of course, Maria Bolshaw, the director of the Tate. Maria is known probably to most of you. I mean, she has had absolutely superbly outstanding career, not only in her previous directorships like at the Whitworth in Manchester, but all the work that she's done, for example, when she was in Manchester, a lot with the city as well, in many other places, and including actually being a trustee on the Claw Leadership Programme, which again shows her interest in developing up younger leaders to come forward. So we feel it's an absolutely incredible privilege to have Maria with us today and just to hear what she's got to tell us about this subject. So Maria, all yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Barbara, and also thank you, Dorothy. It is a real pleasure to be with people again. I'm getting used to that again at the four Tates. It is just such a relief to see people making their happy way through rooms full of art. So I hope I managed to deliver what Barbara was setting out. My talk is something of a personal history and then some observations about the art world. But there are a number of different suggestions that you might want to fashion into calls for action. And I don't propose that I have all the solutions to the challenges that all of us still face. But I do think there is a need for all of us to work together to change more and faster, because frankly I'm bored of it. So the first thing I wanted to say is that in many ways I'm still really surprised to find myself standing here speaking to you at a conference on women in the arts as the director of Tate. I wasn't taken to galleries as a child. I didn't do art or art history at university. I didn't go to Cambridge or Oxford or the Courtauld. I did English literature and cultural studies at the University of Liverpool. I was hard-working and high-achieving, but I was also quite rebellious. I had the grades to go to Oxford, but I was adamant that I didn't want to. And my official reason was because it was too snobbish to go there. But the truth was that having gone to a really quite grim comprehensive school, to be honest, I was really intimidated by the idea of it. And I had no role models or anyone around me to encourage me to think that I might have possibly thrived there. Alongside my school and family life, I was a rhythmic gymnast. Now, you may have seen some of that on the last day of the Olympics. They still keep it in a kind of minor league sport, definitely. But I really enjoyed it. My mother had taken me to a gym club when I was 5 because I was quite an active child. And I took to the sport, and she made some lifelong female friends and became a coach. So age 11 to 16, I was in the national squad, training daily, often on my own before school and always afterwards. And I'd like to say that I loved it. And in a way I did, because it was very addictive and exciting. But it was also lonely and painful, and I got shouted at regularly by my coach because positive psychology methods definitely hadn't been invented in the early 1980s. But what I know I learned from that was a discipline of mind and body and emotions, and a kind of focus, and also the importance of practice and repetition if we are going to succeed at the things we want to do. And I know that that has helped me in the very different world that I live in now. People often say to me, oh, you're really good at public speaking, you really enjoy it. And of course, as I'm sure is the case for nearly all of you, I hate it and I'm not very good at it, but I have just practiced a lot. What I also learned that helped me, I think, in my later life was, through the gymnastics, I should say, was the encouragement of doing something in spite of other people. The kind of, I'll bloody show you energy of wanting to prove somebody wrong and achieve beyond a person's expectations. And although I think that leaves many of us with quite dark imposter syndrome voices about, am I good enough to do this? Should I be allowed to do this? Which I think women suffer from more than men, although it is also present for them. I think, nevertheless, that one of my biggest motivations to succeed has been other people telling me that I wouldn't, and my determination to prove them wrong. So a standout example was my school careers teacher. And I know they're unfairly maligned and they have a horrible job, but this one was a real prize. She asked insolent 14-year-old me what my career goal was, so I said Prime Minister. She looked horrified and said, did I not think that a nurse or teacher would be a more appropriate role for a woman, as they really couldn't be Prime Ministers? And this was 1984, in the middle of Margaret Thatcher's reign. So what all of that left me with was also a very strong sense of wishing to escape from something. I loved my parents and had a very happy childhood, I would say, but I lived in a really boring new town. My daughter is now 21. When she visited there, age 14, said, I love Nanny and everything, but honest to God, Mum, how did you survive this town? So, you know, it was good to have that affirmation. So I was bored in my town and I was hungry for something that looked a bit more like The Face magazine. My mum's cool younger sister and another uncle pointed me towards David Bowie and punk, and that helped. But also seeing Derek Jarman's films on Channel 4 was quite life-changing for me. The universe conjured in his extraordinary films showed me a glimpse of the other England I was looking for. And I think that definitely speaks to what having an art collection around you does to you when you're a student. I spent most of my teens and definitely my university time feeling like I didn't belong. On reflection, I mean, I didn't like that very much at the time, but on reflection, I think that wasn't an entirely bad experience, because it built in me a sense that I had to learn to be okay wherever I was. And it's meant I am relatively comfortable talking to anybody. And it's taken me many years to notice that that is a relatively uncommon trait and a genuine asset in the role that I have now, and in all of my kind of leadership duties. So, having turned away from Oxford for want of encouragement, I went to Liverpool, and my reasons were deeply flawed for going there. It was because I supported the football team, which I decided to do as a small child to annoy my Manchester United supporting father. This, once I got to university, was a very poor reason for selecting an English literature degree. But I did love the city, and I definitely loved Tate Liverpool, which was the first gallery I got to know. My course was very old-fashioned, but I was saved by two inspirational examples, amazing feminist lecturers, one Shakespeare scholar, the other a film theorist, who encouraged me to pursue my passions and my politics. And it was through their support that I ended up getting a first-class degree. One of those lecturers, Linda Williams, told me to go to Sussex. She said, basically, there's a queer feminist revolution going on there at the moment, and that sounded like a good place to go to. My first meant I got funding to do an MA and then a PhD, and I really discovered both who I was and a place that I wanted to be in this maelstrom of debates around queer theory and post-colonial feminist theory. I became an academic, worked first in London, then Northampton, and then finally in Birmingham. Some of my friends are still a bit amazed that I'm not an academic now, after all that training and books and work that I did. I'll come to that in a moment. Whilst I was doing my PhD and working as a junior academic, you'll remember the 1+2 AHRB funding, those of you that are old enough, that just meant you just definitely didn't have enough support to finish your whole PhD. So I started working and obviously stopped writing my PhD because it's hard to do both. But I thought I would add to the burden by having my son Jake and then my daughter Lily. My best academic friend at the time, who's now the provost at Kingston University, also had 2 children. We were the 2 most junior people in our department. No one in living memory in our whole division, never mind just our department, had actually birthed a child in the department. So we were a definite gang of 2 women with 4 children. And I share this not only to note that despite everything that does still need to change, there has been huge positive improvement for working women. But also because in learning to juggle a baby, my career, my life and friendships, I feel was actually the most formative and valuable experience I have had. Because as a not very well-off parent, I learnt to do things with ruthless efficiency. I no longer had the luxury to take as long as I liked to write an essay or a lecture. I also learnt that toddlers don't take no for an answer when it's time to play, in their view, and that also you become ineffective really quickly if you don't have playtime as well as work time. I'm not suggesting having children is a solution to everything, or that everyone must have them, but I did want to use this keynote to be on the record, countering some of the untruths that hold women of all backgrounds and identities back still. Even in my own organisation, I still encounter younger women who hear from others that they can't have a family and a big leadership role in a museum or in the wider arts. And this is in spite of the fact that at Tate, the 3 most senior women, me included, have 8 children and 2 stepchildren between us, and we have always worked. I feel in our sector and in wider society, our post-pandemic thinking about the future of work only underlines how we all need the freedom to make the widest variety of life and work choices. And we need modes of working that will really support the widest pool of talent that we will need in our organisations. So it's not only about parenting. I think leaders ought to be considering now what more diverse leadership and different organisational structures might look like in order that we can forge the leadership that is needed for the complex, multivalent times that we find ourselves in. I also think, especially for the generations that are following my generation, the generations of students who are going through university right now, that it's time we thought about how work can and should be different as people live and work much longer and might choose to have many career shifts and changes in the course of much longer working lives. So this kind of very driven, must dedicate everything to work and only work doesn't seem to me very productive any longer. So to return to my career journey, how did I move from academia to Tate? And what might we tease out from this about gendered leadership? I was kind of halfway up an academic career ladder, and in truth, I was bored. I was having a spinning on my chair day thinking, what on earth am I going to work on next? Even though I loved teaching students, I really liked my colleagues, so I was good at what I did. I could have stayed where I was, as my friend Helen did, and I know I would have been diligent and effective because that's in me. It was instilled in me from childhood onwards. But actually, I found the relative isolation of academia, and certainly its disconnection with the wider cultural world, frustrating. I also came to see that my real skill was in motivating and engaging people. And although I hope that this is not the case so much now in academia, then, nearly 20 years ago, that was definitely not the most prized attribute within the academic world. A friend sent me a job advert to direct an action research programme called Creative Partnerships, which was created in large part by Chris Smith, who I know will be around later. It was part of wider New Labour social policy. The programme was tasked with bringing artists of all types into the 16 most economically challenged areas of the UK, including Birmingham, where I lived, to bring artists into schools. My main qualification for the role was my research background, but never having worked in the arts, it is fair to say I was a fairly unlikely candidate. But I went for the job, I was asked for interview, had a thoroughly enjoyable time, because I thought I wouldn't get the job. And so I was probably my most relaxed self, and of course found myself being offered the role as a secondment to the university, all parties delighted. So another point about the things that we inflict upon ourselves. I still see that it is much too prevalent amongst women that we talk ourselves out of jobs even before we apply, and that definitely needs to stop. Coming into creative partnerships was one of the most difficult and intensive jobs I've ever done. It was as hard as taking up the role of director of Tate, which has been quite hard. It was difficult because we were given £2 million to spend in a year on artist-led activity with schools in really tough circumstances. None of the 16 directors across the country knew what they were doing because no one had done anything like it before, and I especially didn't know what I was doing because I was also having to get to know a whole new sector and hundreds of new people. I realise now that much of the resilience, determination, creativity, bloody-mindedness, empathy and passion that I need in my current role was forged then. I came to understand that for me it matters hugely that the work I do makes a difference in the world. And I realised through the very difficulty of doing that role that I needed help, and I learnt to ask for it. I was really fortunate to have been interviewed by a very wise female arts leader in Birmingham who recognised my energy and good ideas, but also told me directly, you will need help because you don't yet know your way around. And she offered to be a mentor. Another friend encouraged me to get a coach, and both coach and mentor really encouraged me to build an alliance of fellow travellers in the arts. In the role that I am now in, I have had to build such a network around me again. And however successful and experienced or senior any of us are, the need for this, in my view, never goes away. That terribly cliched phrase that people use when they start a new big challenge, it's a steep learning curve, is really just a polite phrase for really bloody scary change. And we all need champions as well as critical friends to get us through those challenges. And this to me feels like a good message for today. A message about solidarity and support. It's powerful to ask for help and to recognise the things that you can't do alone and that other people can do better than you, whether they be friends or members of your teams or colleagues. They then have a genuine role in achieving a goal. It also helps with building the networks and friendships. And these will help more, I have found, than anything in terms of achieving whatever needs to be done. So I've now had 3 quite distinct careers, and I also think that the process of shifting sectors and having to start to learn how things work again has been a crucial part of my leadership development. I've developed through that some degree of comfort in leading and making decisions even when I don't have all of the facts, and especially when I am not necessarily the most experienced or expert in a particular area. And given the pace of change and the ever more complex realities we deal with in work, and especially as leaders in work, I think this comfort with not knowing everything is really important. And I observe that there are gendered differences around that kind of comfort level. And it may seem counterintuitive, but it's vital to be accepting of the things you don't know or can't do well and allow other people to step into those opportunities. And the pandemic has only underlined this for me. It is very important, I think, to be able to live with and make decisions in the face of uncertainty. I have seen over the last 18 months that for people in positions like mine, it's been the ability to hold the confidence of others when I had no idea what to do for the best, nor how things were going to play out. In March 2020, when staff across Tate asked, how long will lockdown last, Maria? We all need a date. So when are we going to reopen? So, I don't know. No one knows. Anyone that says they know, they're making it up. And all we can do in the face of that level of uncertainty is say, we have to work with whatever is thrown at us. And it may well be a gender cliche, but in the last 18 months, I've seen the strong, directive, often male leaders struggle with this more than women who were more able to say, I'm not certain what's best here, but can we work in this direction? And I think this has been reflected in the leadership that we have seen across the globe during COVID. You know, big shout out to Jacinda Ahern, who wins that contest, I think. So I am now myself questioning even more deeply some of the leadership qualities we have been taught to admire. So clarity, strength, objectivity, holding to an agreed course, they all sound really quite sensible. Useless over the last 18 months. What has been valuable instead has been kindness, empathy, flexibility and humility. And I think we need to deepen our exploration of what good leadership needs to be like in this very fast-moving world. For me, there were other leaps of faith that have helped me get to where I am now, that I think are useful to tease out. Winning a place on the first year of the CLAW Cultural Leadership Programme, which was set up by highly determined female philanthropists who wanted to positively intervene in the culture of leadership in the arts. It gave me a structure of support for my leadership instinct. And it also gave me, I'm going to move my slides on at this point. I should have had that one on earlier. It's Shyla Berman. This is what made people slightly happier during the worst parts of the dark winter lockdown in London. A complete Diwali takeover of the front of Tate Britain. But this is a picture of my fellow travellers when we were a lot younger than we are now, and one of them is sitting 3 rows from the back there. So apologies, Susanna, for forcing us to look at our younger selves. So this was the CLAW leadership group who became, for me, an instant peer group of very different kinds of arts leaders, which came from not only grand establishments. You know, there was the National Gallery and major theatres, but there were arts leaders from places like the New Lodge Community Arts Organisation in Belfast and Rich Mix in East London, someone from Devon and Cornwall Libraries. And they are a group of people who have gone on to not just powerful jobs, but actually to be powerful drivers for change in our sector. In all sorts of different ways are modelling different leadership modes in the arts. After doing this programme, the next sort of important leap of faith for me was moving to be the director of the Whitworth Art Gallery. It sort of made sense because it was halfway between my academic foundation and my cultural sector experience. It took me to Manchester, a city that was very ambitious about culture and the benefits it can bring for people. And I had bosses then who wanted risk-taking and excitement, and peers who wanted to collaborate to do things that no one else was doing. Through that, I got to test a lot of ideas without the spotlight pressure of being in London at a national institution. And again, I think that's important. We often need a space to test and fail before we're ready to test and succeed. It meant I got to lead a wonderful capital project supported by the Heritage Lottery Fund and the University of Manchester, which opened the Whitworth up to the park around it, We worked with a relatively young architectural practice who were also challenging the way things were done. My roles in Manchester grew with me in the 12 years that I was there, and my responsibilities expanded to take in Manchester Art Gallery and then lead culture for the city, such that by the time Nick Sirota announced he was going to retire, I had something close to the experience to be considered seriously as a candidate. But before I move to consider the wider situation of women in the arts, I want to point to one key issue in that period that I think still holds many women back and held me back and almost meant that I didn't throw my hat into the ring for the job that I now have. I worked closely with the inspirational Alex Poots, who set up and then led the Manchester International Festival. When I was offered a bigger role to lead culture as well as be directors of the both galleries, which felt like an awful lot, he asked me two questions. He said, "Do you want to do what the role needs?" I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "If so, know your own value and name your conditions and believe in yourself." I didn't really believe in myself. He found that much easier to do, and he had absolutely no problem about naming his terms and recognising his own value. My words failed me when I tried to do that, and that is something we all have to work on. I spent some of the summer reading Marianne Siegert's The Authority Gap, and really that is what she's talking about. I think we can understand how this still holds women back, and it's one of the things that we can support each other as men and women to change. So, what are the position of women in the visual arts now? Now, if you look from the outside through the lens of 2020, so the Tate lens, let's say, it looks fantastic. Yoyu Kusama is on at Tate Modern at the moment, celebrated and sold out right the way through the autumn. She is now one of the highest value artists in the world because her work was championed by the now director of Tate Modern, my wonderful colleague Frances Morris. She did that in 2011. Kusama, however, had been making work for almost 60 years at that point. At Tate Britain, at the moment, we have a magnificent Paula Rego show, a full career retrospective. She is 87 years old. It is one of the most powerful and moving shows I think we have ever presented at Tate Britain. But again, we must note that she has waited 70 years for this to come to pass. So I'm really proud to be director of Tate at a time when it's no longer the exception that women artists can be the mainstay of the programme for a National Art Museum. These are women artists who have reshaped the artistic and cultural canon and who are also household names and commercially successful. We should not be surprised about that because, of course, women are 50% of the population, have long dominated the art schools, art history courses, gallery and museum workforce, but it has taken a very long time to get to this place. When I first worked with Marina Abramovic in 2009, she didn't have gallery representation, her work was not even in Tate's collection, and this despite the impact of her performance work in the 1970s and 1980s. We made an 18-day-long performance exhibition, her and 14 other live artists. Some of it, look, she led the whole group of visitors out of a drill that she had led, all in lab coats, part of an experiment. But even as we were planning this, we imagined it would be a niche exhibition for, you know, the insiders who were into strange performance art and feminism. Instead, it sold out for every day of its run, even though visitors had to stay for 4 hours. The public, it seemed, were way ahead of us in terms of thinking and embracing a different vision of what mattered in the visual arts. At Tate now, 65% of staff at all levels are female, and 80% of the senior team are women. This, I think, is a cause for celebration, although I am regularly criticised for having too many women. Given that I'm the first woman to have ever led Tate, and that across the 12 London-based national museums, there are only 2 women, that the Science Museum, the Natural History Museum, the National Gallery and the British Museum have never had a woman director, and the V&A, it's the most pink of all the museums, has only ever had 1 woman director, and she, I think, was given a very rocky ride. So to say that there are too many women seems to me a bit unfair, particularly if you look at the gender balance of our sector. So Arts Council data tells us that 57% of women working in this, women are 57% of the sector. And that only increases as we move into the humanities and the wider art history and museum studies. Tate's gender balance now only reflects those who choose to study and train in our sector. More to the point, and because we are at a Women in Leadership conference and we have excellent male colleagues but a majority female audience, I shall quote my wonderful colleague Frances. She said, 2,000 years of patriarchy. You get 5 minutes in charge before the complaints begin. So, wider analysis of the arts sector paints a gloomier picture than the one we see at Tate. Of the 11 major institutions in London that receive more than £1 million of Arts Council funding, only 35% of the directors are women. This is as opposed to institutions receiving below £1 million, where 63% of them are female. Across the arts sector, men are still paid 10% more than women in the arts. I don't know why. I am proud to say there's no gender pay gap at Tate. If you look at fated, and I think fatally skewed measures like the Art Review Power List, Power 100 list, only 30% of entries in the complete list were women, and this has decreased by 7% since 2018. According to the National Museum of Women in the Arts, 51% of visual artists practicing today are women, but when it comes to exhibitions and gallery representation in London, only 35% of artists represented by commercial galleries in London were women. It has increased 3%, again, a bit too slowly, I think. Figures coming out of the auction houses are even worse. It's painfully slow. The number of female artists across all their sales increased by just 2% last year compared to the previous. The balance of exhibitions happening across London and indeed across the UK falls into this 65%, 35% split, which is some progress, some visibility, not enough. Tate, the Government Art Collection, the Arts Council Collection and many museums, especially those with collections around the UK, are now making serious and sustained efforts to ensure that gender, racial, ethnic, sexuality of artists acquired do reflect the society that we live in now. A great stat I found, 93% of the 42 works acquired by the Government Art Collection in 2018-19 were by women. At Tate, presently, this means we have a strategic focus on acquiring artists of colour, non-binary and women artists, because despite the great efforts of feminist academics and curators of my generation and those that were before me, we still do not have enough work by women, non-binary people or artists of colour present in our historically white and male collections. We get criticised for taking this action, and we get criticised for not doing enough fast enough. And I have a lot more sympathy with the second of those criticisms than I do with the former. We have got to keep this focus across the more than 500 years of art we care for, because things change when we are determined to make them do so. So over the last 10 years, 50% of the artists representing Britain at the Venice Biennale have been women, compared to the 35-65 split of the past. If you look at the Turner Prize, 2009 to 2019, 67% of Turner Prize winners were women. Lubaina Himid became the first woman of colour, as well as the oldest artist to win, in my second year in the role, which I was really delighted about. She will now have a solo exhibition at Tate Modern in the autumn, one to watch out for. At the moment, in the Natalie Bell building at Tate Modern, half the rooms are devoted to a solo female artist. We shouldn't even have to comment on that. But this is only a start. The next step is to bring in more diverse voices to the gallery, more of this, to seek out women who are making challenging and innovative work, to bring in those who have been neglected by history, and to work towards greater representation of diverse, non-European women in our collections and in our galleries. When I reflect on my position now at Tate and that of my colleagues, I can see that the support my staff can expect is unrecognisable compared to when I had my kids. As a young academic, I had 3 months maternity leave, and when I came back to work, I was asked to leave the senior common room once because I was breastfeeding and it upset someone, a male colleague. At Tate now, we support an amazing parent and carers network. We have breastfeeding and expressing rooms, paternity, maternity, carers, adoption and compassionate leave. We understand that many of us as white women occupy positions of privilege compared to our female colleagues of colour. The network recently came together with the Black and Minority Ethnic network at Tate to invite Candice Braithwaite, author of Making Motherhood Diverse, to speak at a joint event so that we could explore the more that we need to do to challenge stereotypes, flex our working arrangements and challenge ourselves to support all parents better so that we get the best for everyone as well as encourage people to thrive. It is so that talent is nurtured across the organisation. But I didn't want to end on a we're doing things well at Tate because it's complacent. There is so much more that all of us need to do if we are to make a fairer world for all of our daughters and sons. And I think about it a lot because I'm the parent of young adults, male and female. And so I would like to say that despite my very considerable cultural clout, which I recognise, I would like to say that I have not encountered everyday sexism, lazy stereotypes and misogyny, but I have, and I still do. And I feel if I don't speak about that, which I rarely do, I am complicit with it. And I thought this was my opportunity. So this ranges from the very spectacular, such as being introduced as the director of Tate with my husband standing beside me and the person turning and shaking his hand, to vexatious conversations with men in the art world about Me Too allegations being exaggerated, to the widespread commentary from journalists about my colourful clothes. It obviously is true, but my yoga practice, my children, my husband's, even my ex-husband. I have checked. Many of my male colleagues buy gorgeous shoes, expensive suits, and surprise, surprise, have begat children. You will look long and hard before you hear any mention of that. It is not an equal world, even though I'm glad to say I have many, many more senior female leaders alongside me, some of whom are here today. And it will not be more equal until we speak honestly and kindly about the challenges we still face. And even if I still find it difficult to do this, I can see and understand why we all do, but it is necessary. So in the interests of making things change, I will share that I am feeling a bit tired, and you'll probably notice that later this evening if we're staying for dinner, because I woke up 6 times last night in a horrible menopausal hot sweat phase that I am in. This is a challenge that my museum director husband never has to factor in. The real reason behind my early career drive and resilience was that before I had 2 children, I had 3 miscarriages, and my career was the only positive thing I felt I could control, as my body had utterly failed me. I am now better at understanding the complexities of social media, the fluidity of contemporary gender identities and discussions and youth culture, because my 22-year-old daughter is a very wise guide. I have insight into the failures of the adult social care system because my dad had multiple strokes and my mother lived her last months with cancer at home with me because I could not bear a repeat of the cycle of hospital, care home, hospice. And these are not extraordinary things, even though they were heartbreaking for me. They're just the very regular things that many of us have to face as we do our work, our leadership roles, or our studies. And so they should be talked about. I have always tried to be kind to people I work with, and I believe that this is massively powerful. Much better, in fact, than being ruthless. It's another kind of stereotype I like to quash. I would like to see this attribute encouraged more in our workplaces as well as in life. We live now in a very connected world where collaboration across disciplines is required nearly everywhere. So it really helps if people want to work with you and think you're nice. And being nice doesn't mean that you can't also be direct and tough and ambitious and high achieving. In the words of the wonderful artist and teacher Richard Wentworth, it's just good manners and it makes the world go round. All these things, most of which we rarely mention, mean we will be better equipped to lead in complex circumstances with more empathy. And this is the culture for all genders that I'm striving for at Tate. It's the culture I think we need in order that the arts might be genuinely inclusive, meaning that our sector could be part of promoting the things that we need for a good society. For this, I celebrate all that this conference will discuss and the calls to action it might make. It's a much needed campaign. I have a very clear vision for Tate to be artistically adventurous in terms of its thinking about what artists, audience want and need. And I see it as our social and ethical responsibility to strive for relevance and connectedness with the widest range of communities in our cities and towns, as well as with the audiences that see us all over the world through our digital realm. This is anyway a huge challenge, and the past 18 months have made it an almost unbelievable challenge. So empathetic leadership can feel very hard, especially when there's 1,000 people in the organisation, even more so when we were all trying to connect to each other, when we were actually in our bedrooms, kitchens, studies, lounges, wherever we were. But out of this most difficult of periods, I have seen more and better examples of a humane approach to work that's sorely needed if we are to face the real challenges of our age, like the climate emergency and how we use our cultural voice and our artistic clout to make change happen faster. The challenge of equity in the arts, which I see in peril as the government withdraws support for the specialist arts and humanities subjects that, to me, cultivate the knowledge and understanding that people need to deal with the world that we live in now. What we must support in terms of leadership is collective problem solving, generosity of knowledge sharing, and commitment to long-term goals. And this means growing our collective tolerance of uncertainty and building our resources for long-term tenacity. So I think my final words are about what makes a difference to women's place in the arts. It is, I feel, the building of networks of support, the people who come along with you. I have taken my biggest risks when I've been holding someone else's hand. No one will believe in themselves. No one will have the courage to come with you if they think you're perfect, because where is the space for them? Failure has to be practiced so that risks can be taken. Risk-taking needs to be encouraged alongside good risk assessment, and we need some things to go wrong so we can understand better what right might look like. The barriers and stories that held women artists back in the past are being rewritten by women. They have been rewritten by professors like Griselda Pollock, who you will hear from tomorrow, and I mean, they have been rewritten. What I would say is that now women hold positions of power such that we can follow on from that. Almost every major shift or brilliant project that I could point to comes, I feel, when women choose to shape the narrative themselves and help other people as they do. This is true if you look at Annie Albers, marvellous show of her work at Tate Modern 2 years ago now. She embraced the textile room and the loom and the people around her, working with other women to make the world and the work that she wanted to achieve. Or if we look at the quilts made by the women of G Bend, which have just been brought into Tate's collection, these two. It was a wonderful show at Alison Jack's gallery fairly recently, another brilliant show at Turner Contemporary in Margate. These quilts are making histories and beauty out of the discarded fabric of their lives. They are acts of collective resistance. And the work of art that unlocked something for me when I was 21 was Cornelia Parker's Exploded Shed. Cold Dark Matter, the work is called. When she explodes a shed, she also, of course, explodes the history of sculpture, as well as our gendered attitude to violence, to give us a cartoon illumination of our fetishization of objects and stuff. But she's not working alone when she's doing this, but with a team of dedicated volunteers. In the case of this work, the Territorial Army, who she persuaded to blow the shed up for her, and a group of motley volunteers who then collected every bit for her. She persuaded people to create this work, which is hers. That persuasion is, to my mind, one of the most powerful of feminine characteristics, although, of course, it can be practiced by all genders. And if we finish with work by Mary Kelly, who I had the pleasure of working with in Manchester, who was the first artist in residence and began the collection here, she was working as part of a network of women. Artists, academics, friends who sustain her still. As I say, you get to hear from Griselda later. When those women gathered to celebrate Mary's exhibition in Manchester, I have never in my life heard such noise and energy and laughter and disparagement and teasing and commitment to the support of each other. So, much needs to change still, to change some of the more depressing facts we heard earlier, but acts of collective determination, undertaken with kindness, joy, humour, a bit of RC defiance, are what we need to make the arts the place where we can all thrive. Thank you very much.
Well, that was even more brilliant than I thought it was going to be. Absolutely fantastic. I mean, wonderful things in it. I mean, you really epitomise the future of leadership, actually. That was really, really, all the words you used and the way we need to see it was just absolutely wonderful. But I'm not going to, I might say something at the end of this, but right at the moment, I want to get you people in the audience really involved in this, because, I mean, you've said so much of, your own life, but also what women can do, also the way women are held back, and this whole question of leadership. And I just want to get people in and get their thoughts. Now, I'd quite like to do it, well, first of all, I should say, everybody in the room is entitled to have their view and their question. And I'm particularly keen to make sure that young women here do have their say, because you may see things differently from the way some of us do. So it's really important that you come in and talk about what you think we need to do, say in leadership or whatever. I would also encourage the men. I forgot to welcome the men here, because the people who are here, who are men, actually are people who are doing things to actually improve this situation for women. They are male allies, and it's great to have them here. I just hope you now understand the experience of being one of the very few men in a room full of another sex here, and that women, most of the women here, and certainly the older ones, have been many, many times in that situation, and usually ignored by it. So we won't ignore the men here and encourage you to come in as well, but everybody should come in. I maybe try and take 2 or 3 items at a time to get going. You don't need to go to a mic. It's all geared up in some miraculous way so that we can hear you in the room. So who would like to get going on this? Great, go on. Yeah, Karen.
Yes.
Oh yes, do say who you are first, so that we can all get to know each other. Yeah.
I'm Karen Livingstone, and I'm a Deputy Director at the Fitzwilliam Museum. So may I make a comment and ask?
Yeah.
Maria, first of all, thank you so much for a really inspiring speech. And I think what you've encapsulated is a leadership style which is very powerful, which is bringing your whole self to work and your authentic self. And I think that is also something that women do very well, but maybe we're a bit afraid to sometimes. So thank you for taking the lead in that perspective. My question is based on a comment that someone said to me when you first took up your role at Tate, which is, oh, she can't afford to fail after Nicholas Sirota, the god. And I really challenged that, and I said, that's a terrible thing to say. Because A, she's a human being, and she's got the job, and B, failure is actually an important part of developing success and having who you are. You've talked a little bit about that. Could you say something about how you make it safe for your colleagues to fail in an institution like Tate? You referred to Manchester being a safe place, and you had hand support. How does it feel at Tate, and how do you make it okay for your colleagues?
Okay, hang on a minute. I'm going to take a couple more just to keep moving. So where we got some more? Yes, please go on.
So I empathised with quite a lot of the points you said. I grew up in Manchester, so I volunteered at the Whitworth just after you left, actually. And I come from a very working class background, and it's often been not a barrier, because I got a first from Cambridge, but it's been difficult at times, like even getting to the point where I would apply. And I'm now mentoring another young person that's also from a working class background with the added difficulty of being a person of colour, to try and get her to reach her kind of dream of studying history of art at Oxford. And the barriers I hear from her again are she's got like twofold, if that makes sense. I often feel that like class is a thing that's not really addressed in institutional politics, especially because it's not part of the Equality Act. And I wondered, like, if you could expand a bit on how your experience of being from, like, of going through this kind of town that you mentioned. That I grew up in Stockport, and that was
Honestly, Stockport's glamorous compared to where I grew up.
But yeah, I wondered if you could say something on the experience of kind of going to leadership and learning to lead from a kind of yeah.
Can you just say what you're doing now?
I'm a graduate. I've just got a new job. I volunteer on the New Hall Art Collection doing research, and I've been working on a particular room for the Rehang. And I've just got a new job as an arts assistant at Adam Brooks, working with hospital arts and how we can move the hospital arts sector up to the museum standard. Thank you.
Okay, why don't you take those two? So making it safe for colleagues to fail almost, and then the class question.
I mean, I don't think it is entirely safe yet. It's a long-term project at Tate. And there's, I mean, in relation to Nick and following him, I mean, that was one of the best thing was that I was a woman, because actually it's never going to be like him. And so that was a sort of given. But Tate as a whole entity had expanded so much and become so driven And at a senior level now, we have really recognised that the terror of I must not fail, I am not allowed to, is actually holding people back. It is probably the strongest unnecessary inhibitor. That I will be castigated. Praise only comes through very status-driven success, and actually moving too fast as well, so that there is no time to learn. So the pandemic, actually, where nothing worked as it's supposed to, was actually quite useful. And I think it has expanded the space, the necessary space to experiment. And I think you can't just tell people, it's all right. We're not going to mind if it goes wrong. No one wants things to go wrong. To my mind, what you have to do is increase the positivity around encouragement and talk about values and behaviours and appreciation and recognition of colleagues, not for doing only the starry things, but for doing the daily things. And that kind of creates a larger space where people feel they will be supported. Because it becomes absolutely constipating in an organisation if nobody feels they can fail, and especially even worse if they feel they're not allowed to tell anyone that something's gone wrong. So again, a culture of no one will ever shout at you, just say, and it's definitely not there yet, because actually we all hold a bit of it, and it relates, I think, to your question, that we hold ourselves to extraordinarily high standards. So the class, I didn't use the word class, but I hope it was really clear. I would say that as much of my self-doubt and my own discomfort still in the role that I have come from my class background as my gender. And it's not, again, in the same spirit of honesty as my comments about everyday sexism. I would say I sat in a room with a group of women supporters of Tate when discussion of school and children. So, where did your kids board? To me, and I was like, oh God. So I don't even know the names of the boarding schools, and I felt I'm supposed to go and get my bag now. I better go home. So I still feel it because I didn't feel that I had the same cultural capital as the people that I encountered as I moved through education, and I think we just have to talk about that, and again within my own organisation, and I think more now across the arts sector there is better recognition that class and economic and educational barriers are one of the great impediments to coming into our sector or thriving within it. So you have to embrace, you'll always doubt yourself a bit. If it wasn't your class perception, it'll be something else. But don't accept it because you have got your qualifications and they are yours.
As another person from a working class background, the one thing that you do learn is that you have to make it happen yourself. And actually, it's in a way, once you get far enough along, it stops. In a sense, you get over. You can do more than other people can because you're not inhibited because you never thought you had to do it that way in the first place. Yeah. Really, so it's but you've got to get there first, haven't you? In that confidence. Now, let some more in. Yes, please. Yeah, go on.
Thank you so much, Maria. So great to hear you talk. I'm Kate McMillan, I'm speaking tomorrow. I guess my question is something that I think about a lot in terms of, because I do the freelance report each year, so I'm mapping some of the data that you talked about in your talk, is the kind of the differences that we see in salaried positions in organisations such as Tate, where we can say, great, we've got no gender pay gap, isn't that fantastic? And that we can actually put things in place in organisations to kind of mitigate some of those barriers, but that it's artists who work as freelancers, in precarious situations, they don't have those safety mechanisms of policy and practice. And so there is this often, when we talk about gender in the visual arts, that there is this sort of, you know, this tension between people on salaries and you know, achieving and getting better statistics there, but the experience for artists is quite different. And so I'm just interested to think about some of the examples that you gave to, you know, mitigate some of these things in your workplace. Do they resonate for artists as well? And if not, or in what way are they similar or so on? It's something that you could comment on.
Yeah. Another one to come in on this round. Yeah, right up at the back. Yeah, hello. Go on. It's Debbie up there. Go on.
Hi. So I don't know if it's quite a question, but I'm so glad that you mentioned networks of support. I was actually, you know, writing that as a possible question while you started. But this issue of mentorship, I think, is such a pivotal one, especially for women of color who are coming from, I mean, other countries. I mean, essentially, I think about myself sometimes and I wonder, even though I'm at Cambridge, I'm doing a PhD here, it feels sometimes like there's just no way into the room. It's wonderful being at this conference because for once I can actually interact with people who are in the very field that I'm, you know, trying to make headway into. But I think ordinarily it's quite difficult to maneuver into these circles, and I just don't see how, you know, you're able to do, well, someone would be able to do that if they're coming from a space where they have no links to this country. They have no, I mean, they don't have family, they don't have contacts, they don't have a mentor they can call on, or someone who can introduce them to someone else, you know, at this museum or that. But I think it's been very heartening to hear also how you maneuvered from academia into this art space. You know, just knowing that there are options. But yeah, I think really my question is just how to even get into these spaces.
So precarity and getting into spaces.
Yeah, so I think some of what I said pertains to artists, but there are bigger challenges, and I deliberately chose the Kusama example because the kind of the wider artist community needs to, that answer that female artists won't make money or shouldn't be paid appropriately just doesn't stack up now, even in terms of the market, because there are notable examples, although it's still disproportionately skewed towards male artists. And so I think there is something to do with, I mean, Friedland's has been amazing because it is beginning to be an evidence base, and it needs to be an evidence base that that anyone can draw on. And it's not that each individual has got to say, I know my own value, but I did learn something from Alex Poots, who had kind of gone through this kind of school and education and training that meant I'm just going to say what I am worth. And if they don't want me, then I'll go somewhere else. People don't always have that option, however. And I think within organisations now, publicly funded organisations especially, there is just much clearer recognition of what appropriate pay levels are and should be. And there's a really useful movement, I think, around the networks that support freelancers in the visual arts, at least, to start to really codify what is a reasonable rate of pay, how should people be treated, what should they expect. And I am starting to see positive shifts, and I think we've just got to encourage that and kind of publish them. And there's in our learning and education team now, who use such a wide variety of freelancers and not always very well organised in the past or appropriately paid. I hear them say, we have a rate card, you know, and they're just really clear about it, that people are paid this because they have this level of experience and this because they have more. And so it's transparent. And that's what we've got to get better at. And I heard a female gallerist, really influential one, talking really interestingly about her own work to challenge the historical kind of male painting like this equals this, female painting equals this. She said, but sometimes there will be differences because some of my female artists choose to make a very different kind of work. And that I'm okay with, but we need to explain and understand, and not just assume sort of feminine work is this and male work is this. So there's transparency, I suppose, in clarity, and starting to be able to draw on the evidence base seems to me really important. And in relation to the mentorship thing, you heard in my talk, someone offered that to me. It was Dorothy Wilson, who was director of the Midlands Arts Centre, and she was massively influential for lots of artists, and arts professionals, especially women. But she knew, and she was willing to pass that wisdom down the generation. Not everyone will encounter somebody as marvellous as Dorothy. But I think, so within Tate, we have started training people in mentoring as a protocol and supporting coaching. And again, expanding the conversation about it so that people at all levels in the organisation might mentor somebody else or be mentored and know that that's an okay thing to ask for. Because when you dig deep into what makes young people thrive in private education, so what do the grammar schools do, what are the private schools that make their young people succeed so well, it is being trained to ask for help, expecting that you should have a mentor, that being built into your part of your educational process. So if we know it works and makes a difference, we ought to be doing it more widely. And so that is something universities, some do, some don't encourage that. Within organisations, I think we really should. And the more we open up the conversation, you're not asking for a mentor because you are deficient. It's the opposite. You're asking it because you're self-aware enough to know that there is stuff to be learned from others. Some of whom will be older than you, some of whom might be the same age. We've been doing a lot of peer mentoring, which has been, and reverse mentoring. I have a reverse mentor at Tate who has saved my back on a number of occasions, the wisdom of her insight.
Can I just go back to the freelancing thing? I think I'm looking at the person who was talking as a dancer, who's freelance in London, and you were saying that you were in a group somehow a part of an organisation in London that is really trying to work on sort of rights of freelancers. Is that right?
Yes. No. Hi, I'm Laura Caldo. I'm a dancer and choreographer. I'm also working for the London Mayor at the moment on a big research and advocacy project about improving the lives of creative freelancers in London. And each of us are partnered with an institution or organisation, so we're kind of learning from each other and understanding from each other, and we're trying to make recommendations. And I think it's really interesting what you were saying in your talk about the ability to fail, and also in response to that question about the ability to fail, because what I think is really difficult as a freelancer is there is no ability to fail. You have to be 100% every time you walk into a room and you deliver that project and then you leave. And so the continuity to be able to experience failures and to kind of work through them, that's really hard to find as a freelancer. And one of the things that I'm working with my organisation, which is the Little Angel Puppet Theatre, is on, they don't actually have an HR department, but because freelancers don't have HR, there's nobody in the organisation that is caring for you holistically. So you often work with a producer and you have a great relationship with that producer, but they're often freelance themselves and they sort of move on. So I'm very interested to speak to everybody about that at some point.
That's good. Great to get that on the agenda nicely. Now, just one last comment from somebody. Great, go on, Luke.
I wondered if I could invite you to talk about. I'm Luke Sesson. I work with Karen at the Fitzwilliam here in Cambridge. I wondered if I could invite Maria to talk a little bit about the organisations with over £1 million and the questions of museums and others that have had long lines of male directors, and to address governance, perhaps, and the people who are making appointments, and where you see impediments in that particular area, because it's still a very shocking statistic, and I speak as a male director of a museum that has only ever had male directors. So, is there something about those making the appointments, those chairing the boards, that is still the key problem?
Yes, I think so. I mean, there's part of me. So John Brown can't be here today, I believe. He appointed me in the end, but it was quite a thing to get there, as I'm sure he would agree. And he is as his support for this college has shown, he is a different thinker anyway around where talent might come from. But I think the point also applies to, even more so to people of colour, because it is just not acceptable how few leaders of arts organisations are people of colour, both across the world and in the UK. And so I think there's a thing about, it's not just about the chair or the panel themselves, it is about the whole process. So we have been going through a process at Tate. We're saying, I won't look at a shortlist unless it is diverse in every sense, and class is an issue there too. And so, well, we can't find anyone. So, well, you're clearly not the right headhunters then. And headhunters won't say that so much anymore. But there is different work that needs to be done to make sure that we are looking at the widest range of people. And we need our boards to be diverse to allow that to happen. Because I think my appointment came to pass in part because the chair then was willing to think very differently. The artist trustee was on the panel, and the Scottish lesbian feminist trustee was also on the panel. And that makes a difference, because the right lived experience at a most senior level was in the room. And so the questions they asked were different. And that's so the whole thing is, and who you invite even to consider themselves. So this thing, because I almost didn't return the headhunter's call, because I had about 24 reasons myself why I wouldn't be considered. And so as within organisations and our board, they have to know that they have got to work harder to find the people who would come into the room for them to even know that they would be the right person for the job.
Great or awful, depending on where you think. At this moment, we're going to draw this to an end. It's absolutely fantastic, all the things you've said, and I'm sure for so many people in the room, the experiences that you've described in various different ways have all come through. I was just going to say, for those of you who are interested, for the last few years, we've been doing a research project here called Collaborating with Men, which is about how men can help change the workplace, and how men often don't understand a load of the things that you've actually described that are happening in the workplace, that they don't even see it. And some fantastic research which just shows that, it's sort of like, is it easy to get promoted here if you're a woman? Less easy to get promoted. And the answer is, for women, they say 80% of women say that in an organisation, but in the same organisation, 20% of men see it. So, the difference between what people see. If anybody wants to see that, the report of some of the final works of that are in there, but it's been great working with a load of organisations. But the things that you've been saying, I think that so many of us in the room would have thought, yeah, that happened to me, in a sense that's reassuring, but in a sense that's horrible, because it doesn't, we've got to get these changes. But you've really set a fantastic sort of scene for this conference, but also, set us on the way about the things that really need to still be moved in that. And that's just great, and just so nice to meet you and see you. So big round of applause again for you. stay there just a second, because, and then we'll both go down together, because you've kindly introduced John Brown into this. John Brown actually funded this conference as well as other things, which I'll come to. He, in the end, couldn't be here, so he's done a short video for us, which we'll come to in just a second. But I just wanted to say something about John and his connection with us, really. He has this is all about a very powerful woman, a woman called Paula Brown, who was his mother. And Paula Brown lived just down the road from here, and she was very keen on women's colleges. She thought that actually women had the right to get on and do things and achieve and everything. So she did know the college a bit. And of course, those of us who know John Brown are pretty sure that quite a lot of what she thought rubbed off onto him, because we've got people from our alumni who've been actually Liv Garfield, particularly at Severn Trent Water, chief executive. She became chief executive at 35. Who appointed her? John Brown. You know, a man who actually looks out for where the people are who are the right people, and often they are women who have been left out. So there's John in his own right, but because there was obviously this local connection, he did give us some funding for scholarships for women from Eastern European countries, from where his mother came from, because his mother went through Auschwitz amongst other things. So a really amazing woman. So he did the Paula Brown scholarships, but most recently we were having conversations about this building, and this building used to belong until May to a Japanese foundation, the Ketsu Foundation, who built this building on Murray Edwards College land in early 1990s. Never really made it work properly, and eventually wanted to actually get out of the long lease that they had with us. But of course we had to pay our way out of that long lease. And we were really stuck. This is not a wealthy college because it's a women's college, and women haven't made that much money yet to actually give back as alumni, but for all sorts of reasons. But as a new college, we don't have lots of money, coming in. But there was John sitting in front of me one day, and I said, "You wouldn't actually think about giving us 2 million to get this back, would you?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I think I might actually." So the reason you're in this particular building is this is the first major event since its opening that has happened in here. And it's named the Paula Brown Building, and I wanted you to understand that. And I'm sure we're just going to listen to this video. We'll go and sit down and watch it, and I'm sure John will say something about what he's up to. But the conference was a deal. He said, "If we're going to give you this money, you've got to run these conferences for the next forever," he said, actually. And I did say, could we have a sort of deadline on that? And anyway, we've agreed to do. We will be doing 5 conferences on women every other year, so for the next 10 years. And we chose the first topic to be about women in the arts, because actually the college, certainly in my time, has focused particularly actually on getting more women into sciences, because the numbers are outrageous. As students, like only 3 years ago, there were 13% undergraduates in computer science who were women. I mean, really, So there's plenty of work to be done. So we've been working along on more on the sciences to some extent. I thought he'd want to do a conference on engineering, but actually there's a lot of stuff on women in engineering. So between the conversation and now also obviously the art collection, women in the arts and how we could really promote them came up as the one for the first conference that we're having. So that's just a bit of the story behind how you got to be here today. So we're going to go and sit down and just watch this. I haven't seen it, so I don't know what he's going to say, but let's go and sit down.
Good evening, and let me add my welcome to all of you. Let me also add my thanks, first to Murray Edwards College and its new president, Dorothy Byrne, for hosting the first in this series of conferences. Second, to my friend Barbara Stocking, the former president, whose vision and leadership have underpinned not just this conference, but a highly successful period in this college's history. She leaves Murray Edwards in great intellectual, financial, and reputational shape. And thirdly, participants in this conference, many of whom I've known and worked with for many years. I'm very sorry I can't be with you in person, but I have other things I need to do after the delay of the date of this conference. But I am delighted that all of you are in what is now called Paula Brown House, which I formally opened with Barbara in July. For those of you who don't know, the house is named after my mother, and she was an Auschwitz survivor and a remarkable woman, a businesswoman in Singapore, a businesswoman in the UK, but most importantly, an optimist who always looked to the future, never to the past. She really did believe the best is yet to come, and she wanted others to enjoy opportunities which had been denied to her. And that's why she felt a particular connection to this college, and why the John Brown Charitable Trust has funded the Paula Brown Scholarships here for many, many years, enabling women from around the world to attend Cambridge when they might otherwise not have been able to do so. When Barbara told me about this particular building and the impact its acquisition could have on the college, I was delighted that my trust was able to help, and I'm very grateful to the college for renaming the building in my mother's memory. Dorothy, Barbara and Maria have already spoken about the purpose of this conference and provided their own perspective on and experience of gender equality. So I want to just add one point. When it comes to inclusion, whether of gender, race, sexuality, or something else, we must never take progress for granted. The world reminds us every day that progress is fragile and that society can go backwards as well as forwards. It is important to celebrate what's been achieved, but never stop striving for improvement. As an eminent former judge on the International Criminal Court once told me, constant vigilance is needed. I'm delighted to support this conference in this newly named house. I'm sorry that I can't be with you, but I very much look forward to working with Dorothy Byrne and her colleagues in the years ahead.